anticipated even in the middle of the summer to get Robert Mueller finally to testify.
And things keep changing as they did last night. So
what will he be able to say?
Honestly, so we're just 24 hours away from special counsel Robert Mueller testifying before Congress about his investigation into President Trump, of course, and Russian interference in the 2016 election. And then last night, there was a development. On the eve of this high-stakes testimony, the Justice Department sent a letter warning Robert Mueller to, quote, remain within the boundaries of his report, end quote. Also, the letter warned him not to talk publicly about anyone he investigated but did not charge.
Yeah, this red line. I mean, there's always a letter, right? There's always some kind of red line. And now this is the question. Could it significantly affect how Democrats and Republican lawmakers try to get information, new information really for much of the public about why the special prosecutor drew no conclusion about whether President Trump should be charged with a crime? Will the special counsel's testimony create momentum for impeachment, or will Americans be left asking why Washington is still talking about any of this? We have a lot to cover this morning. We want to begin with Lauren Fox. She's live on Capitol Hill with more. Lauren, good morning.
Good morning, David. That's right. You know, Robert Mueller has testified on Capitol Hill 88 times since 1990, but of course, never like this. Democrats are really hoping that tomorrow's testimony shifts public opinion. Meanwhile, Republicans hope it will be the last chapter in that saga of the Russia investigation, and the Justice Department putting some guardrails on what the special counsel can say.
Former special counsel Robert Mueller will testify tomorrow in two highly anticipated hearings on Capitol Hill. The Justice Department issuing him this warning before he speaks, demanding Mueller, quote, remain within the boundaries of his public report because matters within the scope of his investigation were covered by executive privilege, and avoid discussing the conduct with respect to uncharged individuals.
And the report is my testimony. I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress.
Mueller, a reluctant witness, will appear under subpoena in back-to-back hearings before the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees, facing questions about the 10 episodes of possible obstruction outlined in the Mueller report, and about Russian interference in the 2016 election. Some Democrats believe Mueller could help Americans understand his findings.
For most people, this will be the first time they will hear what's in that report, what was actually found in this investigation by Mr. Mueller and his team. It's a damning report with really disturbing evidence against the president, and I think it's going to have a very powerful impact on the American people.
But Trump allies telling Democrats and the public it's time to move on.
Yeah, I think the apple is done. Most Americans were looking to Mueller to tell them what happened, not Nadler. Do you think any fair-minded American believes that Nadler's out to get the truth? He's already convicted the president in his own mind. This is all about impeachment.
Sources tell CNN congressional Democrats are preparing for Mueller's hearing seriously.
These are serious members who are on the Democratic side treating this as the most important hearing that they've had so far in their lives.
President Trump downplaying the former special counsel's testimony.
No, I'm not going to be watching, probably, maybe I'll see a little bit of it. I'm not going to be watching Mueller because you can't take all those bites out of the apple. We had a total no collusion finding. The Democrats were devastated by it. They went crazy. They've gone off the deep end.
And behind the scenes, preparations have been extensive. Democrats have held mock hearings, have scripted questions. Republicans have watched hours of past testimony from Robert Mueller on Capitol Hill, trying to get a sense of exactly how he'll answer questions. And Robert Mueller himself also preparing an unused office space at his law firm here in D.C. Alisyn?
Okay, Lauren, really interesting background. Thank you for all of that. Joining us now to discuss it, we have Elie Honig. He's a former federal prosecutor and CNN legal analyst. Sungmin Kim, White House reporter for The Washington Post, and CNN law enforcement analyst Josh Campbell. He's a former FBI supervisory special agent and the author of a new book, Crossfire Hurricane: Inside Donald Trump's War on the FBI. The book is now available for pre-order. It will be released in mid-September. Congrats on the book.
Thanks. Good morning.
Okay, so let's talk about what happened last night, Elie. The DOJ sent this letter to Robert Mueller, and in it said he must remain within the boundaries of your public report because matters within the scope of your investigation were covered by executive privilege. How does that change what's going to happen tomorrow?
So it could change quite a bit. First of all, I think the letter holds no water legally. What DOJ is trying to do here is take every objection known to man, and they just sort of list them end to end and say, for all these reasons, you need to constrain yourself. But executive privilege has no legal application here. What they're really doing is piggybacking off of Robert Mueller's self-imposed limitation that I'm going to stay within the four corners of the report. I think he's wrong. I think it's actually a little bit hypocritical of Mueller to say that, because subpoenas, Robert Mueller knows better than anybody. He served 2,800 subpoenas. They are not optional. They're mandatory.
But why doesn't executive privilege apply to those?
Because Robert Mueller is not an advisor to the president, for sure, right? The executive privilege applies to communications between the president and his own advisors. There's no way Mueller is an advisor of his. There's also this argument, well, Mueller learned about those communications. But if Mueller learned about them, they're waived. They're out the window.
So I think this talk about the third party, uncharged third party members is very interesting, Josh, because to me, this is the Justice Department saying to the special counsel, hey, remember where FBI Director Jim Comey got into so much trouble by running afoul of these Justice Department regulations? You can't render judgment about people who haven't been charged, like the president, like members of his family, or maybe opine about where he may have obstructed justice if you didn't reach a conclusion about obstruction of justice. That seems to be what they're saying, arguing at least.
It sure does, and this is smart both procedurally but also politically, because procedurally you want to stay within the bounds of DOJ guidelines. You don't want to go out and talk about someone obviously that hasn't been charged. I think what Comey mentioned there was such extraordinary circumstances, but this is interesting and maybe good politics as well for Barr, because he's basically telling Democrats that, hey, the thing that you said that you didn't want to happen to your candidate back in 2016, we don't want that to happen to any innocent people today, which I think, that will be their line. I don't think that's going to fly. I do think that Robert Mueller is going to do something that few statesmen have been able to do in the modern era, and that is unite this country. Not around a uniting principle, but around frustration and anger about Robert Mueller, because both sides are going to be angry with him by the time the thing is finished. I think probably half hour in, you're going to sense a lot of frustration. You're going to have Republicans trying to tear him down. You're going to have Democrats trying to gather important information in the public interest that people want to know, again, what was inside his thoughts, what was going on inside of his mind. If he stays within the four corners of those documents, I think both sides are going to come out of there very frustrated.
Well, I don't see how he's going to stay within the four sides of this document, Sung-Min, because the most burning questions are the ones that were not answered in the report. For instance, the three questions that Neil Katyal, the acting Solicitor General under Obama, suggested. I'll just read to you what his op-ed says. First, did your report find there was no collusion? Okay, that's what the president has claimed. Second, did your report find there was no obstruction? That's what the president has claimed. Third, did your report give the president complete and total exoneration, as he has claimed? Those are really the three questions that everyone wants to know. And doesn't he have to answer those?
Well, I think he could also just kind of repeat what his report actually says. And I think Democrats on Capitol Hill are very cognizant of the fact that Mueller has these self-imposed limitations, that he has said publicly that if he were to testify, that his report would be his testimony. But I think what Democrats are banking on here, knowing and going into these high-stakes hearings, knowing that is really that power of a visual and the gravitas that Mueller can bring by just even repeating and stating the conclusions of his report to the public. I think we saw just how dramatic that could be with a surprise statement at the Justice Department several weeks ago. The dynamics of impeachment and whatnot in the Democratic Party had been stagnant, but then you suddenly saw at least a couple of presidential candidates watch that testimony or watch his statement and say, I am now convinced with what the special counsel had said that we must move forward ahead with these impeachment proceedings. Nancy Pelosi has pointed out that according to CNN polling, only 3% of the public has actually read the Mueller report. So I think they're really banking on that visual, the audio, to really change the dynamics, change the politics of impeachment.
So can we actually show some of the polling on this? This is P202. Look, I feel so comfortable. I'm going to start calling stuff out by number.
I can see that.
And
You're
by the way,
this,
I'd like to order the number 7 as well, if that's possible. But look at the. Look. You have 76% of Democrats who say you move forward on impeachment. But then Republicans and independents, you've got 6 out of 10 who say no among independents. You've got more than 9 out of 10 Republicans who say don't move forward. So, Ellie, I feel like there's a two-step process here that supporters of moving forward on impeachment would like to see, that somehow more of the narrative gets out. Instances of potential obstruction of justice that are in the report that people may not know about. The conversations between the president and his White House counsel, Don McGahn. trying to fire Mueller. People may not know that story. And to hear him say it in real time would be compelling, even if he doesn't go beyond it. But then there has to be enough fire that catches after that to really change this dynamic, which is very, very difficult.
I think that's exactly right. I look at this at two levels. First of all, there are still questions within the report itself that need to be answered. I'll give you one example. One of Mueller's main conclusions is that members of the Trump campaign expected to benefit from the Russian election campaign. So the question is who? Who in the Trump campaign expected to benefit electorally and how?
He can't say that.
Well, I think he can, because he says in the report, senior members of the Trump campaign expected to benefit. I think you can say you wrote that in your report. Who specifically? It's in your, arguably, it's still in your report.
Yeah, this is a really interesting
Yeah,
point.
we're going to have a back and forth on
Names
this.
aren't spelled out, so is that allowed or not? That's one of the
Exactly.
Well, and other things, Sunman, I mean, if he's asked, the New York Times suggested this, where you say you listed all these potential areas of obstruction of justice, what concerns you the most? Does he bite on that? Or does he say, well, not really for me to assign a priority one versus the other?
I mean, again, like we'll see tomorrow. I can't imagine if he's asked that type of question that he kind of ranks what of the 10 concerned him the most. I think that just he has stressed over and over that what he's going to say is what is already in there. And I think Josh is exactly right that you're going to have, unless barring some major bombshell, like you're going to have Republicans frustrated who are going to trying to be backing up the president anyway, and also Democrats who are probably going to get frustrated a little bit. Even if that visual of him testifying is pretty compelling.
Yeah, but that's a good point, right? Because on the Republican side, getting him to say in front of God and everybody else, that there was no collusion, that there was nobody worth charging with a crime, that's very important for the president. That's what the president.
Right, but I think there too he also adheres to what's actually been written. I think that bottom line here, folks need to manage their expectations, because the one question that I think Democrats want answered, and you talk about impeachment, we have a document here. What's different hearing him say it, and what's different than actually reading it? What people want to know is what is he going to say that's not actually written in there? And the one question is, if this was anyone else other than the president of the United States, would you have indicted him? I will go on record now here saying there is no way that Robert Mueller answers that question.
So what does he say?
He's going to say that's a hypothetical. I would, refer you to my to the document, what's been written there. Again, this goes back to the frustration that people are going to be feeling after this hearing, because what's not in the document people want to know. But again, I don't expect that he's going to come out and have some grand moment where he starts dropping bombshells or sits back and starts editorializing on the state of the nation and how this impacts, America politically. If people going in wanting that, I think, are going to be disappointed.
Bottom line, Ellie, you say that he needs to stop being so Yoda-like.
Yes. Look, the time is here, and it's now. Let's drop the mystery, drop all the double speak, the double, triple negatives. Please, I know it's unlikely that he will give us a straight answer, but he should. He really should, because the problem is, by being so careful and phrasing everything, I would if I could, but I can't, he's left this huge gap of misunderstanding in the American public. And who has jumped into that gap gleefully with distortion and mischaracterization? Bill Barr and Donald Trump. And as a result, we're in this netherworld where everyone sees things their own way. So hopefully, Robert Mueller, let me appeal to Robert Mueller. Let's have straight answers. I think we deserve it as the American public. I think Congress needs it. And frankly, look, this is Mueller's last act in public life. I think he owes it to his own legacy and to the work of his team.
I could see Mueller actually saying, you know what, looking in the camera saying, I'm doing this for Ellie.
That'd be great.
That is.
You know what I like about the cover of your book? Can we show Josh's cover again?
Thank you.
It's not out till September. It kind of looks like a Nelson DeMille novel on the cover.
We were going.
I'll buy it just for that reason. I'll buy it just for that reason.
We're going for the appeal. So no, thanks for mentioning that. Yeah. And I will mention also, for those who pre-ordered it, I'm really grateful. I just learned it was #1 on the Amazon national security list yesterday in pre-order.
Wow.
So thank you so much for doing that.
It's only going to get better. Ellie, Josh.
So bipartisanship to tell you about this morning. The White House and congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle have reached a tentative 2-year budget deal, raising spending by $320 billion and suspending the debt limit. A bipartisan deal, not something we talk about every day.
Did you say bipartisan?
Oh, I said bipartisan. Matter of fact, we've said it 3 times now.
That is
No, but
obviously
this could have been a big deal if they didn't get an agreement before Congress left, and fighting over the debt ceiling. A lot of concern about what the impact would be on the market. So
It's bipartisan.
We have bipartisan agreement. Joining us now, Daniel Strauss, politics reporter for Politico, CNN politics reporter Arlette Saenz, and John Avlon, CNN senior political analyst. So, John, this is a big deal. I mean, the ramifications of not getting the deal would obviously be severe. We've been down that road before with a government shutdown.
We have played that game of chicken. Now that crisis has been averted. That's good news for the markets, good news for the country, really bad news for the long-term deficit and debt situation of the nation. Donald Trump campaigned saying he'd eliminate the deficit in 8 years and take down the debt.
It's going the wrong way.
He is now deficit Don. He does not. Republicans are just making it clear that this has all been a con. That deficits only matter when a Democrat's in the White House. They're increasing spending dramatically by $300 billion, not taking it down. And the tax cuts have added dramatically to the debt, around $1.5 trillion in his first 2 years alone. So what you got is in a time of a massive economic expansion, deficits and debt increasing. That's a dangerous combo, people, and we're going to pay the piper down the road.
If it's all been a con, Daniel, I want those 8 years back of the Obama administration, because I will never forget the drumbeat that Fox News pounded every single day, where people's hair was on fire about the deficit and about Democrats' profligate spending. And, between Roger Ailes and Sean Hannity and everybody who would talk about how we're bankrupting our children, and where we're, listen, a bipartisan deal is great. Of course, we can celebrate that. The reason there was a bipartisan deal is because Republicans have given up talking about the deficit and things like that.
Yeah, and look, I really don't see a dramatic shift in support among Republicans for Donald Trump. His approval ratings remain sky high among Republicans, and they're going to hail the points in this budget agreement that they like. They're really not going to criticize the president on increasing the deficit here. I see no change on that front, no matter really how much Democrats crow about increasing the deficit, and I don't really think they will, because, like you said, this is something that they also know Republicans are so lockstep behind President Trump on.
Arlette, let's turn the subject a little bit to Joe Biden and a new policy proposal that he's unveiling about justice reform, which is something he's doing right before the debates. Also a way to preemptively engage his own defense of his record in the 90s. Lay out a little bit about what he's talking about and how it fits in with the broader narrative of the campaign.
Yeah, David, you've seen Joe Biden since he entered the 2020 race. He's come under criticism, under fire for his support of the 1994 crime bill. And today he's unveiling that criminal justice reform plan that is focusing in part on reducing incarceration rates. There's a lot in this plan, so I'm going to try to tick through a little bit of it. There is a $20 billion competitive grant program for states to move from incarceration to prevention, to focus on things that have been proven to reduce incarceration rates, like addressing illiteracy and child abuse. There's also a $1 billion per year funding for juvenile justice. That's a substantial increase from the current funding. And additionally, they want to try to address systemic police misconduct by returning to an Obama-era policy of pattern or practice investigations and consent decrees. And there are a few elements in this bill which are kind of reversals from what Joe Biden supported back when he was in the Senate. It ends mandatory minimums. It also eliminates the sentencing disparity for crack and powder cocaine. Those were in bills that Joe Biden worked on while he was a senator. And it also calls for legislation to end the death penalty on the federal level. Joe Biden, for many years, was a longtime supporter of the death penalty, so that is a shift in change. Biden is going to be speaking to largely African-American groups later this week in Detroit tomorrow at an NAACP forum, and also the Urban League in Indianapolis on Thursday. So this gives him a chance to kind of tout his current positions on criminal justice as he's heading into that debate, where he's going to be standing right in between Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, who both have been very critical of him on issues not just relating to race, but also criminal justice.
And there you have it, John. I mean, this is strategically, I would think, smart, because anytime in the debate Kamala Harris or Cory Booker brings up the crime bill from the 1990s, then he says, well, may I refer you to my new plan for rehabilitation and criminal justice. Here's what I feel today.
Yeah, and look, it's a very detailed plan, and it does reform some of the excesses of that bipartisan crime bill that was passed in the 1990s. And that's the politics of it. But substantively, it's pretty significant to reduce mandatory minimums, to calling for ending the sentencing disparity between crack and cocaine, to call for decriminalizing marijuana nationally and making it Schedule 2. There are a lot of things in here, but the one that I think is going to be a flashpoint for conservatives and and Trump in particular is the flip-flop or shift positions late in life on the death penalty.
Right. Well, also, but will he also engage in some kind of defense of his position in the 90s and argue that the landscape was different and necessitated some of the elements of that crime bill?
Which you can make a very credible case that it did.
Thank you, one and all. We really appreciate you previewing all of that for us. Meanwhile, Russia and South Korea at some breaking news right now. Yes, that is an empty podium for a very good reason, because Britain's governing Conservative Party is about to announce their new party leader as Theresa May resigns as prime minister tomorrow. So we are waiting for that announcement. And CNN's Bianca Nobilo is live now in London with the breaking details. This is running a tad late. We were hoping to know by now, but how's it looking?
They are running just a touch late. I've been inside the exhibition centre behind me where the announcement is going to be made. We've seen Jeremy Hunt, one of the contenders for leader of the Conservative Party, go in there, but Boris Johnson is the man that all of the Conservative members are going to be looking at today, because in all likelihood, Alisyn, he is the person who's going to win this contest and so become the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He's been the darling and favourite of the governing Conservative Party for many years now. But it's always been touch and go as to whether or not he could actually grasp the top job, because he had a history of bottling it at the last minute. He was fairly gaffe prone. He has been likened to the US president as well in his political maverick kind of style. In fact, just the other day, President Trump said that he'd spoken to Boris Johnson rather preemptively, as he is not yet the Prime Minister here in the United Kingdom, but the two men get along well. So that's going to be a huge focus of his premiership if he does indeed get that nomination today. So we're just going to see whether or not the announcement's coming in the next couple of minutes. Then we should hear that Boris Johnson, in all likelihood, becomes Prime Minister. Then tomorrow is the day where the Prime Ministers will switch over. Theresa May will go to the Queen to officially resign, and then Boris Johnson will follow her to officially become Prime Minister and then move himself into 10 Downing Street, Alison.
I'll take it here, Bianca. Thank you. Pretty raucous scene there. Sounds like a Live Aid concert, not an announcement of a political party.
And shouting.
Yeah. So anyway, the big question in all of this, whoever's the next prime minister, expecting to be Boris Johnson, what will Brexit, that divorce from the European, actually look like in practice if Boris Johnson becomes the next prime minister? CNN's Nick Robertson is live at 10 Downing Street with some perspective on that. So Nick, we know that Boris Johnson was actually an architect, was the initial front man for the idea of this divorce of the UK from the European Union. What is the expectation?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is the issue that felled the last two prime ministers. Johnson is expected to be more divisive than Theresa May. The party is already divided. One of his primary jobs coming in, obviously, to pick a new cabinet, but there'll be many people in his party as well as the cabinet who don't support his do-or-die Brexit strategy. The leave without a deal come the 31st of October, a so-called hard Brexit, is his position on that. So that is going to be a big challenge for him. He will have a few other issues. There's a possibility of a snap general election sometime in the near future. He'll have to set a couple of issues on the health service and education straight to win a few extra votes there, if it comes to that. But the big issue that he's going to walk into here is the rising tensions with Iran. The government's position right now is to seek a coalition of security support in the Persian Gulf from Europe rather than the United States. Boris Johnson has said that one of his primary missions, one of his first things he'll want to do in office is go see President Trump. Will he turn to Britain to work with the United States in the Gulf? That's if the United States will have it. Those are the challenges he faces.
All right, everyone is waiting with bated breath. Nick, thank you very much. We'll come back to you as soon as it happens. So, of course, we're awaiting this announcement. Okay, we want to talk about the historic moment that is happening here in the U.S. tomorrow, and that is when Robert Mueller testifies. We welcome in Laura Barron-Lopez. Thank you for being patient with us as we watched all of that. Jeffrey, I want to ask you about what happened last night. a letter arrived from the Department of Justice to Robert Mueller telling him that he better stay within the confines. It was an advisement, I guess, an admonishment to stay within the confines of the report. I'm wondering if you think that that changes the equation for tomorrow.
I think that letter struck me as a finger wag. Like, be a good boy. Don't go outside your mandate. Robert Mueller's going to say what Robert Mueller wants to say. The Justice Department is not going to dictate the terms. However, Mueller has given every indication that those were the rules he was playing by anyway. I mean, this struck me as an unnecessary sort of shot at Mueller.
I think he asked for that. I think he asked them what the rules were, and they responded with that
Yes,
letter.
he did ask for, but if you read the letter is it could have been written many different ways, and it is written in a way that tries to narrowly circumscribe what he is going to say. But, Mueller has a lot of options even within the confines of his instructions. He could say, when he's asked about the facts of the case, we'll see my report. Period. Or he could, as the Democrats certainly want him to do, describe what's in the report. And to me, the most interesting thing about tomorrow is which way Mueller is going to go. Is he going to elaborate or at least explain what's in his report, or is he simply going to blow the members of Congress off and say, I'm just not going to repeat what's in my report?
So, Laura, pick it up from there. What's best case scenario for Democrats with witness Mueller?
So the goal for Democrats here is pretty much to bring the Mueller report to life. They're hopeful that even if Mueller just goes through and repeats what's in Volume 2, which is the part of the document that has the 10 examples of potential obstruction committed by the president, they're hopeful that because of the fact that the majority of the American public has not read this report, that just being able to watch Mueller go through that could be enough to sway some public sentiment. On top of that, yes, they are going to try to get some more info out of him. And so far, Mueller and his team have repeatedly said that the report is going to be his testimony. But there are questions that they can ask concerning Volume 1, questions about the overall scope of the probe, why Mueller's justification for the limited scope of it, as well as questions about whether or not there was anyone from the White House or any people within the DOJ, such as former acting AG Rosenstein, who tried to influence or tried to say that he needed to wrap up the probe at any point.
But you were also saying last night, Frank, as I heard you, that the other question is a lot of Americans might look up and say, why are we talking about this still?
Yeah, no, I think that's a danger here. A lot of time has passed since we first heard the name Robert Mueller. A lot of time has passed since the report came out. A lot of time has passed since the Attorney General, I think, did great damage to this and really kind of dictated the curve of it by coming out with that four-page letter that was so flattering to the president. I'm not sure how many Americans are still paying close attention. And let's remember something else we don't talk about. We talk about what questions the Democrats are going to ask. Republicans are going to get to ask questions too, and they are going to play Donald Trump's game of painting Mueller and his investigation as a partisan witch hunt. That is ridiculous, but Americans are going to hear that too. So a lot of people are just going to end up where they are, their positions baked in.
But even if the Republicans don't attack Mueller, they're going to say, you didn't find any collusion here. You didn't find any crimes. You didn't charge the president with any crimes. I mean, they are going to use the report to make their points as well. Yes. So this is not just the Democratic show.
And we keep talking about the Democratic show, but the Republicans are coming prepared as well. Yeah.
Great point. They've been having their own mock trials as well. All right, panel, thank you very much for all of this breaking news that we've been talking about. So the Justice Department is warning Robert Mueller. Special counsel Robert Mueller will testify tomorrow in one of the most anticipated congressional hearings in decades. The Justice Department has just warned him in a letter to stay within the boundaries of his public report and not talk about anything else or anyone who was investigated but not charged in his probe. So joining us now about how this changes the equation is Democratic Congressman Jim Himes. He serves on the Intelligence Committee and will be questioning Robert Mueller tomorrow. Congressman, great to have you here.
Good morning, Alisyn.
How did that letter that arrived from the Department of Justice last night change everything for tomorrow?
Well, I don't think it changes anything for tomorrow. I mean, one of the challenges here has been, if you watch Mueller's testimony to Congress, historically, he is a man of very, very few words. And so, of course, one of the challenges that we have will be to to sort of give him the questions that bring the report to life. Look, the letter is not rooted in any law. It's not rooted in anything. Mueller can pretty much say anything he wants other than obviously disclosing classified information. So I don't think the letter means a lot. What means a lot is the fact that Mueller has said, and Mueller is a guy who says what he means and means what he says that he's staying inside the four corners of the report.
So he's no longer a Department of Justice employee, so he doesn't really have to comply, you're saying, with the letter.
No, that's exactly right. And I mean, this is a long tradition of this particular White House is sort of making up privileges out of whole cloth. I mean, the notion that somehow an investigation of the president and the president's people is subject to executive privilege or any other privilege is absurd. By the way, Mueller is talking to Congress. Congress doesn't need to recognize any privileges other than the Fifth Amendment constitutional privilege. So the letter is meaningless. What is more of a challenge is, whether Mueller is going to do anything other than stick to the words of the report.
Right. His own self-imposed boundaries are going to be a big challenge for you because, let's be honest, you want him to stray from the report. You have questions that the report didn't answer.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we're talking a lot about, hopefully Mueller saying the report. That's information being conveyed to the American people who, by and large, have not read the report. Secondarily, he's got some questions to answer. For the first time ever in the investigation of a president, he chose not to interview that president. Anybody who's been in or around or is a prosecutor would know that you always interview people to try to determine what they were thinking. And then most interestingly, and I think here's the challenge with Mueller, the report, when you read it, is a series of historical events. George Papadopoulos, on to Dimitri Simes, on to Carter Page. People don't absorb information that way. They absorb a narrative thread. And the narrative thread in this report, even if it isn't obvious, is that the Russians, in dozens of ways, reached out to the Trump campaign to help. The Trump campaign welcomed that Russian help, most notably with Don Jr. saying, if this is what I think it is, I love it. And then they used that help. Now, that didn't rise apparently to the level of a criminal conspiracy, but the Russians offered, the Trump campaign said, bring it on, and then they used the information that came through WikiLeaks in their campaign. The American people need to understand that, if for no other reason to make sure it never happens again.
Here's how it's going to look tomorrow. From 8:30 to 11:30 a.m., the House Judiciary Committee will get their chance to interview him, and they will focus on obstruction, as we understand. Then your committee from noon to 2 p.m., the House Intel Committee, and you all will focus on Russian interference. So in your precious few minutes with him, what's your most burning question you're going to ask him?
Yeah, I think generally my committee is going to focus on episodes in Volume 1, which, as you point out, is about the Russian attack on the election and the Trump campaign's welcoming of that election. Each of us, I think, will take a portion of that report and try to bring it to life. I do think it's going to be different than the Judiciary hearing. The Judiciary Committee is much larger. The Judiciary Committee on both sides have people like Jim Jordan, more activist, more aggressive people. I think you're going to find that the intelligence hearing is a little calmer because it will, again, be on largely on Russia.
What if every single answer he gives you is, I'd like to refer to my report, see my report?
Well, that's okay. I mean, for example, somebody like me, I could say, Mr. Mueller, according to the report, Don Trump Jr. said he loved the idea of receiving help from the Russians. Is that correct, Mr. Mueller? And he, of course, would have to say yes. So, no, I don't imagine that he's going to do a dramatic reading, but I do think it's, again, one of my colleagues said it best. There's a difference between reading the book and seeing the movie, and part of the objective here is that Bob Mueller bring this thing to life. And it's important for reasons far beyond what you think of Donald Trump. It's important because Americans need to understand how they were manipulated on social media. We need to understand how network vulnerabilities can lead a country to damage our democracy. And enough Americans sort of haven't learned the lesson that is in Volume 1. So I think whatever you think of the politics, there's some real lessons in what happens tomorrow.
Have you seen this memo from Nancy Pelosi? It is literally hot off the presses. It's hot in my hands. It just came out, and it is her guidance for House Democrats like yourself of how you are supposed to talk about this before the hearings and after. Have you seen this?
I haven't seen that yet. I've heard about it.
Take a little gander at this, since this is her recommendation to you. And I think what she's trying to tell you is that everybody has to be on the same page before and after this about what you hope to get out, or what comes out of this, because you all don't see this as the end. Whatever happens tomorrow, you don't see this as the end. So what are the next plans for where you all move after what Mueller says.
Well, so I haven't read this document here, but again, I think the big message to come out of this whole event, and let's stipulate that it wasn't criminal. We trust Mueller's judgment in that regard, although there's certainly some unanswered questions. The Russians offered a lot of help. The Trump campaign said, bring it on, and then they used that help. Look, you should form your own judgment about what you think that means about Donald Trump and his people. And you might even, if you're a Donald Trump supporter, say, what if it had been Barack Obama who had welcomed Russian help? How would you have responded to that? But look, we've got larger challenges, right? We've got continuing work to do on fully understanding the counterintelligence aspects of this report. To my way of thinking, I'm not satisfied that we've done enough to really understand exactly how the Russians did that. We've got work to do there. By the way, we've got work to do in this country, those of us who would like to see a different president, in making sure that we're balanced. I don't know that a whole lot of people are going to change their opinion of Donald Trump and the Trump administration tomorrow. So we've got to remember that we've got other messages and other things that we need to do, including addressing the anxieties of Americans at the kitchen table around health care, around educating their kids, around retirement. So we've got to run a careful balance between what it is that we do in the 18 months leading up to the election.
Well, Congressman Jim Himes, I know you're racing to catch a train to D.C. So are we. We're going to be in D.C. all of New Day. We'll be there tomorrow to cover all of this, so we'll be watching closely.
Excellent.
Thanks so much for being here.
Good to see you.
David.